The doctor didn't lower his voice. Another miscarriage. The words echoed down the hospital corridor in Ibadan, like a sentence, not a diagnosis. Before Titilayo Omolara could sit down, her mother-in-law's hand struck her shoulder, shoving her toward the exit. "Get out," the woman hissed. "You bring death into this family." People stared. Someone whispered. Someone laughed. Titilayo's knees gave way. Her fingers tightened around her handbag as tears blurred the white walls. Then it slipped. A thick, sealed envelope fell to the floor. For half a second, a gold-embossed crest flashed under the hospital lights. A symbol of wealth so powerful, it didn't belong in this hallway. A foot came down hard, crushing it. No one noticed. No one asked who she was. They only knew she had lost another child. They had no idea they were throwing away a billionaire's daughter. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if stories about pain, truth, and justice matter to you, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us. Titilayo Omolara had never imagined her life would become so small. Not small in dignity, she still held that quietly, carefully, but small in space, in choices, in how much of herself she was allowed to show. The two-room flat in Mokola, Ibadan, where she lived with her husband and his mother, felt narrower with every passing month, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen to judge. She woke before dawn each day, not because anyone asked her to, but because the house demanded it. By the time the first call to prayer drifted faintly from a nearby mosque, Titilayo was already on her feet, tying her wrapper, sweeping the cement floor, boiling water on the small kerosene stove. She moved quietly, instinctively, as if sound itself might offend someone. By 6 o'clock, Madame Funmilayo Adebayo would emerge from her room. She was a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. Even in her wrapper and headscarf there was an air of authority about her, earned not through kindness but through fear and long practice. Funmilayo had ruled her household since her husband's death years earlier, and nothing had changed when her son married. If anything, her control had tightened. "Did you wash the veranda?" she would ask without greeting. "Yes," Mama Titilayo would answer, lowering her eyes. "And the pot from last night?" "Yes, Mama." Funmilayo would grunt, satisfied, not because the work was done, but because obedience had been displayed. Adekunle Adebayo usually sat on the edge of the bed during these exchanges, pretending to scroll through his phone, pretending not to hear. He was a gentleman by nature, slim, soft-spoken, with the tired eyes of someone who had learned early that peace often meant silence. He loved his wife. That much was true, but he loved her in a quiet way that avoided confrontation, a love that apologized with looks and softened words, but rarely with action. Adekunle worked as a sales assistant at a small electronics shop, earning just enough to contribute, never enough to be independent. The house they lived in belonged to Funmilayo. The furniture, the respect, the final word, all hers. Titilayo had entered this home 3 years earlier, with hope folded neatly inside her chest. She had met Adekunle by chance at a tailoring shop where she repaired clothes for extra income. He had been kind from the beginning, awkwardly, so returning twice to collect a shirt that was already finished just to speak to her again. When he proposed, he promised partnership, not wealth. She accepted without hesitation. What she did not promise, and what no one warned her would be demanded so fiercely, was fertility. In Funmilayo's world, a woman's value was counted in children, preferably sons delivered quickly and without complication. Love, patience, grief, these were indulgences. A wife who did not conceive was not unlucky. She was suspicious. The first pregnancy had brought a brief, cautious happiness. Funmilayo had told neighbors, smiled at church, even bought fruit for Titilayo without being asked. For once, Titilayo felt visible in a good way. She rested more. Adekunle touched her belly with shy wonder. Then one evening, pain came without warning. By morning, the pregnancy was gone. Funmilayo's sympathy lasted exactly 1 week. After that, the questions began. What did you eat? Who did you greet on the road? Did you pray properly? Titilayo answered everything. She explained herself endlessly, even when she didn't understand the accusations. She cried alone at night, pressing her face into her pillow so no one would hear. Adekunle held her, sometimes whispering that it would be fine. But fine never arrived. The second pregnancy ended earlier than the first. This time, Funmilayo did not hide her disappointment. You see, she told a visiting aunt, speaking as if Titilayo were not in the room. Some women come with problems. You don't know until it's too late. Titilayo stood by the doorway, holding a tray of water she had been asked to serve, her hands trembling just enough that a drop spilled onto the floor. Funmilayo noticed immediately. Are you deaf? She snapped. Clean that. Yes, Mama. By then the house had learned a new rhythm, one shaped around what Titilayo lacked. She was watched when she cooked, corrected when she prayed, restricted in where she went. Funmilayo decided which clinic she could attend, which friends she could keep, which church she should follow. Each instruction was framed as concern. Each one tightened the cage. Only once did Titilayo try to speak. It was late and Funmilayo was already in her room. Titilayo sat beside Adekunle on the bed, her voice barely louder than breath. Kunle, she said softly, using the nickname she reserved for moments of vulnerability. I feel like I am disappearing. Adekunle sighed, rubbing his face. She's just worried, he said. You know how my mother is. I know, Titilayo replied, but I am still your wife. He looked at her, then guilt flickering across his features. Let's just endure a little more, he said. Things will change. Titilayo nodded, because nodding was easier than asking how long endurance was supposed to last. She did not tell him about the headaches that came from holding her tears in. She did not tell him how small she felt when Funmilayo spoke about her to others, as if she were a faulty investment. She did not tell him that sometimes, standing alone at the sink, she placed a hand over her womb and whispered apologies to children she would never meet. By the time the third pregnancy came, hope was no longer loud. It was cautious, almost fearful. Titilayo did everything right. She ate carefully, rested when she could, prayed without ceasing. She avoided stress, avoided arguments, avoided joy that felt too sharp. Still, loss found her again. And this time, Funmilayo did not wait for recovery. The hospital humiliation that followed the shouting, the shoving, the word curse, spoken without restraint, was not an explosion. It was the natural conclusion of everything that had been building quietly in that house for years. As Titilayo walked back into the rain that day, numb and bent under a grief too heavy to carry one truth, followed her like a shadow. In that family, she had never been seen as a woman in pain, only as a failure waiting to be discarded. The first miscarriage did not happen in a dramatic way. There was no scream, no collapse, no blood on white sheets that demanded attention. It happened quietly, like something slipping away when no one was watching except Titilayo felt it. She felt the wrongness before the nurse confirmed it, before the doctor spoke in careful, neutral tones. She remembered sitting on the narrow hospital bed, her feet dangling above the cold floor, staring at a crack in the wall while the words floated around her. I'm sorry. These things happen. Try again, as if grief were a task that could be repeated until successful. Funmilayo arrived late that day, walking into the ward with the confidence of someone who believed she already understood the situation. She listened without interruption, her face unreadable. When the doctor finished, she nodded once. What did she eat? Funmilayo asked. The doctor blinked. Madam, my son's wife, Funmilayo, clarified, turning slightly toward Titilayo without meeting her eyes. What did she eat during this pregnancy? Titilayo opened her mouth, but the doctor answered first, explaining nutrition stress chance. Funmilayo listened politely, then dismissed the explanation with a tight smile. "Thank you," she said. "We will handle it." The handling began immediately. At home, Funmilayo called a family meeting. Aunts arrived, an uncle, 2 women from church. They sat in the living room, while Titilayo knelt at the edge of the space, serving drinks, her head bowed. Adekunle sat beside his mother, his shoulders tense. "She lost the pregnancy," Funmilayo announced. Again. It was the word again that stung, though this was the first time. One aunt clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Ah, that is not good." Another leaned forward. "Did she?" Rest Funmilayo sighed deeply as if burdened by patience. "I don't know. These days women do too much, running around, stressing their bodies. You cannot cheat nature." Titilayo's hands shook as she placed a cup of water down. No one looked at her. "She is young," the uncle said. "It may still happen." "Yes," Funmilayo agreed, "but we must be careful. Some problems do not show themselves immediately." That was when Titilayo realized the conversation was not about her health. It was about her worth. From that day on, the air in the house changed. Funmilayo began watching Titilayo more closely. If she returned from the market too late, questions followed. If she slept longer than expected, suspicion bloomed. Food was monitored, movements restricted. "Stay inside," Funmilayo would say. "Pregnancy loss attracts bad spirits." Titilayo obeyed. She told herself this was temporary. That grief made people strange. That patience would soften things. She believed deeply that if she endured quietly, understanding would eventually arrive. Adekunle tried in his own limited way. When his mother spoke too harshly, he would clear his throat, murmur "Mama." When Titilayo cried at night, he held her, whispering promises he wanted to believe himself. "It will be different next time," he said. She nodded against his chest, though something inside her was already bracing for disappointment. The second pregnancy came 8 months later. Titilayo hesitated before telling anyone. She waited, counting days, measuring symptoms, afraid to speak the hope aloud. When she finally told Adekunle, his face lit up with careful joy. "We will tell Mama later," he said, "when it is stronger." But Funmilayo noticed anyway. Mothers like her always did. The smile that appeared on her face that morning was thin but deliberate. She told neighbors, she told church members. She accepted congratulations with dignity, as though the pregnancy were her own achievement. For a few weeks, the house softened again. Then one afternoon, the pain returned. This time there was no confusion, no waiting. By nightfall, the pregnancy was gone. Funmilayo did not come to the hospital. She sent a message instead. "Bring her home when you are done." At home, there was no family meeting this time. There was judgment. "You see," Funmilayo said, standing in the doorway of Titilayo's room. "I warned you. A woman must guard herself. Some wombs are weak by nature." Titilayo sat on the bed, her arms wrapped around herself, still bleeding, still aching. She wanted to speak, to explain that she had followed every instruction, eaten every prescribed meal, prayed every prayer suggested. But something told her explanations were no longer welcome. From that point on, Funmilayo's concern hardened into control. She chose a new clinic for Titilayo, one recommended by a woman from church. She insisted on accompanying her to appointments, answering questions directed at Titilayo, watching every movement with sharp focus. At home, she introduced rules. No cold water, no phone calls after sunset, no visitors without permission, no prayer outside the house. "It is for your own good," Funmilayo said whenever Titilayo hesitated. "Unless you want to lose another one." The words burrowed deep. By the time the third pregnancy arrived, Titilayo no longer felt excitement. She felt fear, fear of hope, fear of loss, fear of what would happen if she failed again. She did not announce the pregnancy at all. Funmilayo discovered it when Titilayo vomited one morning. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. This time, Funmilayo said slowly, "We will do things properly." What properly meant unfolded over the following weeks. Titilayo was taken to unfamiliar places, small prayer houses, dim rooms heavy with incense, women who pressed her stomach and muttered words she didn't understand. She was told to fast, to bathe with strange mixtures, to avoid mirrors. Each instruction came with a warning. "If you disobey, don't blame anyone," Adekunle protested once. "Maybe we should let the doctors handle it," he said quietly. Funmilayo turned on him with surprising speed. "Are you the woman?" she demanded. "Did you carry your father's children? If you want to listen to doctors instead of wisdom, that is your choice. But don't cry when this house has no air." Adekunle fell silent. Titilayo watched him from across the room, something inside her sinking into a cold, steady place. She understood then that she was alone. Not without love, but without protection. When the third miscarriage happened, it felt almost inevitable, as if her body had finally surrendered under the weight of fear and expectation. Funmilayo did not weep. She did not whisper. She exploded. The words she hurled in the hospital corridor, "curse, shame, useless," were not new. They had been forming for years, waiting for permission. As security watched and strangers stared, Funmilayo made her verdict clear. "This family cannot continue like this." Titilayo heard those words long after she left the hospital. As she walked away, soaked in rain, bent by grief, one truth settled heavily in her chest. In Funmilayo's eyes, her miscarriages were not tragedies. They were evidence. And evidence once gathered demanded punishment. If grief had a shape for Titilayo Omolara, it became routine. It lived in the quiet moments between instructions, in the pauses before she answered questions that were no longer questions at all, but tests. After the third miscarriage, Funmilayo's control stopped pretending to be concern. It took on structure, schedule, rules that pressed in from every direction. The morning after Titilayo returned from the hospital, Funmilayo called her into the sitting room. "You will not go anywhere alone," she said, her voice level decisive. "You will eat what I give you. You will pray where I tell you. We cannot afford another embarrassment." "Embarrassment?" Titilayo bowed her head. "Yes, Mama." Adekunle stood near the doorway, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at his mother. He stared at the wall as if the right answer might be written there. That afternoon, Funmilayo took Titilayo to a place she called a cleansing house. It was a low building on the outskirts of the city, painted a dull blue with narrow windows and a smell that clung to the skin. Women sat on wooden benches waiting. Some were pregnant, some looked ill, some, like Titilayo, looked empty. A woman in white touched Titilayo's stomach without warning. "You carry heavy sorrow," she said. "Sorrow blocks life." Titilayo flinched but said nothing. "She must be cleansed," Funmilayo replied quickly. "We have tried patience, now we try wisdom." The rituals that followed were humiliating in their intimacy. Titilayo was instructed to fast, then drink bitter mixtures, to kneel on rough floors for hours, to repeat words she did not believe until belief felt irrelevant. Each time she hesitated, Funmilayo leaned in close, her voice sharp with warning. "Do you want to lose another one?" By the end of the week, Titilayo's body ached from exhaustion. Her mind felt distant, as though she were watching herself from somewhere above, performing obedience with mechanical precision. At home, new rules appeared. She was no longer allowed to cook certain foods. She was told not to speak on the phone after sunset. Visitors were forbidden unless Funmilayo approved them. Even laughter was corrected. "Joy attracts jealousy," Funmilayo said once when Titilayo smiled faintly at something Adekunle said. "You should be careful." Titilayo learned to keep her face neutral. It was during one of the mandated clinic visits. Funmilayo insisted on a new facility, one recommended by a church member, that Titilayo met Sade Ogunle. Sade was a nurse with calm eyes and a voice that did not rush. She noticed things others did not. How Titilayo winced when Funmilayo answered questions meant for her. How her hands shook when medication was mentioned. How she never spoke unless invited. During an examination, Sade closed the curtain fully before speaking. "Are you comfortable?" she asked softly. Titilayo nodded automatically. Sad waited a moment. "You don't have to answer if you don't want to," she added. "But I need to ask, are you under any pressure at home?" The question caught Titilayo off guard. Pressure. The word opened something fragile inside her. Her mouth trembled. For a second she thought she might tell the truth about the rules, the rituals, the fear that lived in her chest like a trapped animal. But Funmilayo's voice cut through the thin wall. "Is she done?" Titilayo swallowed. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Sade studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. But something in her gaze shifted, sharpened. From that day on, Sade found small ways to be present. She spoke directly to Titilayo during appointments, even when Funmilayo interrupted. She explained medications, carefully repeating information, until Titilayo looked less confused. Once she slipped a piece of paper into Titilayo's hand when Funmilayo wasn't looking. "If you ever need to talk," she whispered, "call me." Titilayo folded the paper and hid it deep inside her bag, unsure whether courage would ever meet opportunity. At home, the atmosphere grew heavier. Funmilayo began inviting women over, friends, relatives, church elders who spoke openly about fertility, as if Titilayo were an object lesson. "Some women are not built for motherhood," one said, sipping tea. "It is better to know early." "Men suffer silently," another added, glancing at Adekunle. "They deserve happiness too." Titilayo served them all, her back straight, her face carefully blank. At night she lay awake, listening to the sounds of the house. Funmilayo's footsteps, Adekunle's restless turning, the distant hum of traffic. She pressed her hand over her womb, not in hope this time, but in apology. "I tried," she whispered to no one. The breaking point did not come in the form of shouting or violence. It came quietly. One evening, Funmilayo announced that she had arranged a visit to another spiritual helper. This one lived far outside the city. The instructions were strict. Titilayo would stay there for 3 days alone, fasting and praying. Adekunle protested weakly. "Mama, she is still recovering." Funmilayo turned to him, her expression cold. "Do you want children, or do you want excuses?" The question hung in the air. Adekunle looked at Titilayo, then truly looked at her, and something like regret flickered in his eyes. But he said nothing. That night, as Titilayo packed a small bag, she realized something with startling clarity. Everything she had done, every obedience, every silence, had not softened Funmilayo. It had confirmed her power. She was not being tested anymore. She was being broken. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, Sade's number burned in Titilayo's pocket like a secret. She did not call, not yet. Instead, she followed Funmilayo into the car, her body compliant, her mind retreating inward. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet resolve began to form, not loud enough to challenge, not strong enough to fight, but present. A thought, small and dangerous. "This cannot be my entire life." As the car pulled onto the road, Titilayo looked out the window at the city, passing by markets. Opening children, laughing women arguing over prices. Life continuing indifferent to her suffering. She did not know when or how things would change. But for the first time, she knew they had to. The first crack in the marriage did not come from hatred. It came from fear. Titilayo Omolara sensed it long before she heard it spoken aloud, the way Adekunle hesitated before entering a room, the way he answered his mother with obedience that bordered on desperation, the way his affection toward his wife had become careful, as if love itself were something fragile that might provoke punishment. Funmilayo noticed it too. and she used it. One evening after dinner had been cleared, and the house settled into its familiar quiet, Funmilayo called Adekunle into her room. Titilayo could hear their voices through the thin wall, low but tense. At first she tried not to listen. Privacy had long become a luxury she no longer expected. But then she heard her name. "She has embarrassed us enough," Funmilayo said, her voice sharp with certainty. "People are asking questions." Adekunle murmured something Titilayo couldn't make out. "I am your mother," Funmilayo continued. "I carried you. I raised you alone after your father died. Everything you have came through me. And now you want to throw it away for a woman who cannot even give you a child." The words landed heavily even through the wall. Titilayo sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating in slow, painful rhythm. "She is still my wife," Adekunle said at last. Funmilayo laughed, short and humorless. "A wife who cannot build a family is a temporary arrangement." Silence followed. Titilayo held her breath. "There is a solution," Funmilayo said, then her tone shifting. "A good girl, from a respectable home, fertile, educated. Her name is Moronkeji Balogun." Titilayo's chest tightened. "She is young," Funmilayo went on. "Her mother is my friend. We have discussed this already. No shame. You will marry her properly." Adekunle's voice rose startled. "Mama, you cannot just—" "I can," Funmilayo interrupted. "And I will, unless you want to remain childless forever." That night, Adekunle did not come to bed immediately. When he finally did, he lay stiffly beside Titilayo, facing the wall. She did not ask what his mother had said. She did not need to. The tension spoke for itself. "Kunle," she said quietly, after a long while. He did not answer. "Kunle," she repeated, her voice trembling now. "Please." He sighed and turned toward her, his face drawn. "She is putting pressure on me," he admitted. She says it's for the family." Titilayo searched his eyes. "And what do you say?" Adekunle hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than any words could have. "I don't know," he said finally. "I feel trapped." "Trapped?" Titilayo nodded slowly. She wanted to scream that she felt trapped too, that she had endured humiliation, pain, and silence for the sake of this marriage, that she had lost children and still been expected to apologize for it. Instead, she said nothing. The next few weeks unfolded like a quiet betrayal. Funmilayo began mentioning Moronkeji's name casually at breakfast, during phone calls and conversations meant for others, but carefully staged for Titilayo to overhear. "Her mother says she never misses her cycle," Funmilayo said once, sipping tea. "Some women are just blessed." Another time she remarked, "Moronkeji is very respectful. She knows how to treat elders." Each comment landed like a stone. Titilayo remained composed, but something inside her hardened. She noticed how Adekunle avoided her gaze when his mother spoke, how he no longer defended her, not even weakly, how the space between them on the bed widened night after night. One afternoon, as Titilayo returned from the market, she heard voices in the sitting room. Funmilayo was there, seated regally. Across from her sat a woman Titilayo did not recognize, well-dressed, confident, with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "And this is my son's wife," Funmilayo said, when she noticed Titilayo. "Titilayo." The woman stood and extended her hand. "Moronkeji Balogun," she said. "It's nice to meet you." Titilayo froze. For a moment, the world narrowed to that outstretched hand. She took it slowly. "Nice to meet you," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm rising in her chest. Moronkeji smiled sympathetically. "I've heard a lot about you." Titilayo did not ask what she had heard. That evening, Funmilayo announced it plainly. "We will begin preparations," she said. "It is time to think of the future." Titilayo looked at Adekunle. He did not look back. Later that night, Titilayo found herself unable to sleep. The walls felt closer than ever. The silence pressed in on her chest until breathing felt like effort. She rose quietly and stepped outside, sitting on the low concrete step by the door. The night air was cool, carrying distant sounds of laughter and radios from neighboring houses. She thought of the life she had imagined, simple, yes, but shared. She thought of the children she had lost, the apologies she had whispered into the dark, and she realized something that frightened her. She was no longer afraid of losing this marriage. She was afraid of losing herself. The realization did not come with courage or clarity. It came with exhaustion. A deep, bone-weary understanding that endurance without dignity was a slow erasure. The following day, Adekunle sought her out. They met at a small roadside cafe near his workplace, a place they had once visited often when their love was still new and hopeful. He looked uncomfortable, his hands fidgeting with his cup. "She says we should move quickly," he said without preamble. "People are watching." Titilayo studied him carefully. "What do you want?" she asked. Adekunle opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked away. "I want peace," he said at last. The word struck her like a final verdict. Peace for who, she asked softly. He had no answer. Titilayo nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over her. "Then you should find it," she said, "but not at the cost of my dignity." Adekunle's eyes widened. "What does that mean?" "It means," Titilayo replied, standing, "that I will not beg to stay where I am unwanted." She walked away before he could respond. That evening, Funmilayo watched her closely as if sensing a shift. Titilayo met her gaze calmly. For the first time, she did not lower her eyes. Funmilayo's lips tightened. The battle lines had been drawn. And though Titilayo did not yet know how she would survive what was coming, she knew this much with painful certainty. The marriage she had fought to protect was already slipping through her fingers. Not because she was barren, but because silence had finally reached its limit. The night Titilayo Omolara was thrown out of the house did not begin with shouting. It began with preparation. Funmilayo woke earlier than usual that morning, her movements sharp and deliberate. By the time Titilayo stepped out to sweep the veranda, 2 large sacks sat by the door, empty, waiting. Funmilayo did not explain. She did not need to. "Pack your things," she said calmly. "Only what belongs to you." Titilayo froze, broom in hand. "Mama," she said softly. Funmilayo turned, her expression composed, almost relieved. "This cannot continue. My son needs a future. You have had your chances." Titilayo felt the words settle heavily in her chest. She glanced toward the bedroom, hoping foolishly that Adekunle would appear and say something, anything. He did not. Inside, Titilayo packed slowly. She folded clothes with care, as if gentleness might soften what was happening. Each item felt like a piece of a life being dismantled. Wrappers she had worn while cooking for the family, dresses she had bought cheaply, and repaired herself a small Bible with corners worn thin. She left behind anything that might be argued over. When she emerged, Funmilayo inspected the bag briefly. "Good," she said. "You will leave today." The rain began in the afternoon. By evening, the sky had darkened into a heavy gray, and the street outside shimmered with puddles and red mud. Neighbors lingered under eaves and doorways, drawn by the quiet tension that had settled over the house. Funmilayo stepped outside first. "Come," she said loudly, her voice carrying. "Let people see." Titilayo followed her bag, clutched to her chest. Funmilayo did not touch her at first. She stood before the gathered neighbors and spoke, her tone sharp with purpose. "I have endured enough," she announced. 3 miscarriages. 3. How long should my son suffer? Murmurs rippled through the small crowd. Titilayo stood silently, rain soaking into her clothes, her hair plastered to her face. She did not raise her head. "She has brought shame," Funmilayo continued. I will not allow this family to end in disgrace. Then she shoved Titilayo. It was not a hard push. It did not need to be. Titilayo stumbled, her foot slipping on the wet ground, and she fell to her knees. Mud splashed onto her wrapper. Someone gasped. Someone else looked away. Get up, Funmilayo snapped. Don't pretend, Titilayo tried. Her body felt weak, uncooperative. The pain from the recent loss still lived inside her, sharp and constant. She steadied herself on the ground, breathing shallowly. That was when Adekunle arrived. He rushed through the gate, rain dripping from his hair, his face pale with shock. Mama, stop, he said. Please. Funmilayo turned on him instantly. Are you here to embarrass me further? Adekunle moved toward Titilayo, but Funmilayo stepped between them. She is leaving, she said. This is my decision, Kunle Titilayo whispered, lifting her eyes to him at last. It's okay. The words surprised even her. Adekunle looked at her, torn. His mouth opened, then closed. He glanced at the neighbors, at his mother, at the house behind him, the only security he had ever known. I'll come after you, he said weakly. Let me just calm her down. Titilayo understood. Then, not fully, not intellectually, but in the quiet place where truth finally arrives, Funmilayo bent down and grabbed the strap of Titilayo's bag, yanking it toward the gate. Go, she said, and don't return. Titilayo staggered to her feet, clutching the bag tighter. Rain ran into her eyes, blurring everything. She stepped through the gate. It closed behind her with a final metallic sound. No one followed. The walk to the bus stop felt endless. The rain grew heavier, soaking through her clothes, weighing her down. Her sandals slipped with each step. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stay there. At the bus stop, she collapsed onto a low concrete bench, her bag slipping from her shoulder. Her body shook not from cold but from shock, catching up to her. She pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. People passed by. Some glanced at her, then away. No one stopped. As she reached for her bag, the clasp gave way. The contents spilled onto the wet ground. Clothes, papers, a small notebook, and a thick sealed envelope. It slid across the concrete and came to rest near her foot. For a moment, Titilayo stared at it. She had carried that envelope for years without opening it. It had been given to her with strict instructions, only if necessary, only if everything else failed. She had always believed she would never need it. A passing man stepped too close, his foot coming down hard. The envelope crumpled under his shoe. Titilayo gasped softly and reached for it, pulling it back into her lap. The seal was still intact, but the corner had bent enough to reveal a flash of gold beneath the paper. A crest. Elegant, expensive, out of place in the rain and mud. Titilayo shoved it back into her bag. Quickly, her heart racing. She did not know why the sight unsettled her so deeply, only that it did. She sat there for a long time. The rain slowed. Night settled. Eventually she stood, shouldering her bag once more. She walked without direction, following lit streets, avoiding dark corners. Every step felt like movement away from a life she had known toward something undefined and frightening. Somewhere near a closed market, exhaustion overtook her. She sat beneath a shop awning, curling in on herself, her back against cold metal. Her stomach cramped painfully. She pressed her forehead to her knees, breathing through the waves. For the first time since she was married, Titilayo allowed herself to cry freely. Not quietly, not carefully. She cried for the children she had lost, for the marriage she had believed in, for the dignity that had been stripped away in front of strangers. When the tears finally slowed, a strange clarity followed. She was no longer anyone's wife. She was no longer under Funmilayo's roof. She had been cast out publicly and deliberately. And yet beneath the fear, beneath the grief, there was something else. A thin, unfamiliar sensation. Relief. As dawn approached, Titilayo rose stiffly and began to walk again. She did not know where she would sleep that night. She did not know how she would survive. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever came next would be faced on her own terms. The gate behind her had closed. A different door, one she had never intended to open, now waited somewhere ahead. Titilayo Omolara learned quickly that survival did not announce itself with kindness. It arrived in fragments: an open gate left unlocked, a stranger's brief hesitation, a question asked without judgment. After dawn broke over Ibadan, pale and uncertain, she found herself standing at the edge of a compound she had passed many times before, without noticing. A faded sign hung crookedly on the wall, its paint peeling. Women's Transitional Home, Mama Yetunde Ajayi. Titilayo stood there for a long moment, her bag heavy on her shoulder, her body aching from a night without rest. She did not knock immediately. Pride lingered like a stubborn wound. She had been taught to endure quietly, not to ask. But the ache in her abdomen sharpened, and dizziness pressed at the edges of her vision. She knocked. The gate opened slowly. A woman in her late 50s peered out, her hair wrapped in a simple scarf, her eyes alert but not unkind. "Yes," she asked. Titilayo swallowed. I was told this place helps women." Mama Yetunde studied her carefully, her soaked clothes, the stiffness in her posture, the quiet in her voice that spoke of long restraint. "Come in," she said simply, stepping aside. Inside, the compound was modest but orderly. A few women sat on benches, some holding children, some staring into nothing. There was no pity in their eyes when they glanced at Titilayo, only recognition. Mama Yetunde led her into a small office and handed her a cup of warm tea. "Drink," she said, "then tell me what you can." Titilayo's hands shook as she lifted the cup. The warmth seeped into her fingers, into places she hadn't realized were numb. She drank slowly, then set it down. "My name is Titilayo Omolara," she said. Saying it aloud felt grounding. "I was married. I lost my pregnancies. Last night I was sent away." Mama Yetunde nodded as if this were a language she understood fluently. "You can stay," she said. "For now. No forms, no interrogation. No demand for explanation, beyond what Titilayo could offer." That night, Titilayo slept on a thin mattress in a shared room with 3 other women. The sounds around her, soft breathing, the rustle of blankets, were unfamiliar, but not hostile. For the first time in weeks, no one watched her sleep. She woke with a headache and a sense of disorientation. Freedom, she realized, was not immediately comforting. The days that followed settled into a fragile routine. The shelter was run on cooperation. Women cooked together, cleaned together, shared what little work came in. Titilayo took to laundry and sewing repairs, her hands moving with familiar precision. She did not talk much at first. Listening felt safer. Mama Yetunde noticed everything. She noticed how Titilayo flinched when voices rose, how she apologized too often, how she folded herself inward as if trying to take up less space. "You are allowed to sit," Mama Yetunde told her one afternoon when she found her standing, long after her work was done. Titilayo hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden." Mama Yetunde's expression softened. "Rest is not a burden." The words stayed with Titilayo. At night, when the shelter grew quiet, her thoughts grew loud. She replayed the moment the gate closed behind her. The sound echoed in her memory with brutal clarity. She thought of Adekunle, of his eyes filled with something like regret and his failure to move. She thought of Funmilayo's certainty, her satisfaction. And she thought of the envelope. It sat at the bottom of her bag, untouched. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the roof, Titilayo pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her thumb paused over a name she had not called in years. Auntie Kikalomo. The name carried weight, history, a life she had chosen to step away from when she married Adekunle, believing love did not need inheritance or protection. She locked the phone and set it aside. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. The following week, Mama Yetunde introduced her to a small tailoring shop nearby that needed help mending uniforms. The pay was minimal, but the work gave Titilayo purpose beyond survival. She walked there each morning, her posture slowly straightening, her steps less hesitant. One afternoon, as she returned from the shop, she saw a familiar face across the street. Adekunle. He stood uncertainly near a roadside stall, scanning the area. When his eyes met hers, relief flashed across his face, followed by guilt. "Titi," he said, hurrying toward her. "I've been looking for you." She did not move. "I'm sorry," he continued, breathless. "Everything happened too fast." Mama was angry. "I didn't know what to do." Titilayo looked at him steadily. "You knew what was happening," she said quietly. "You just chose not to stop it." Adekunle winced. "I want you to come back. Just for now. We can talk. I can convince her." She shook her head slowly. "There is nothing to convince," she said. "She made her choice. You accepted it." His shoulders sagged. "What do you want me to do?" Titilayo considered the question. "I want you to leave me alone," she said. "For now." The words cost her more than she let show. Adekunle stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as someone to be managed, but as someone setting boundaries. "I still love you," he said softly. "I know," Titilayo replied. "But love that watches harm and stays silent is not enough." She turned and walked away, her heart pounding but her steps steady. That night, back at the shelter, Titilayo sat on her mattress and stared at the envelope again. Her fingers traced its edges. She thought of the life she had stepped away from, the guarded houses, the controlled privacy, the expectations she had rejected for simplicity and love. She thought of the cost of that choice. For the first time, she wondered if choosing simplicity had meant choosing vulnerability without protection. Her phone buzzed, suddenly making her jump. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." There was a pause. Then a familiar voice, calm and unmistakable. "Titilayo," it said gently. "It's Kikalomo." Her chest tightened. I heard Auntie Kikalomo continued. "Not everything, but enough." Silence stretched between them. "I didn't want to call," Titilayo said finally. "I thought I could handle it." "I know," Kikalomo replied. "You always think you must endure alone." Tears welled in Titilayo's eyes. "Where are you?" Kikalomo asked. "At a shelter," Titilayo said. Saying it aloud felt like admitting failure. "There is no shame in being safe," Kikalomo said firmly. "Listen to me. You don't have to decide anything tonight, but I need you to know if you ask, I will come." Titilayo closed her eyes. The offer hung in the air, heavy with consequence. She did not answer immediately. But for the first time since the hospital corridor, since the shove, since the gate slammed shut, she felt something shift inside her. She was no longer completely alone. And somewhere between the thin mattress and the sealed envelope, between the past she had left and the future she feared, Titilayo began to understand that survival was only the beginning. Something else, something harder, something braver was quietly waiting. Funmilayo Adebayo did not sleep well after the night she threw Titilayo out. Not because of guilt, because control, once exercised, publicly demanded completion. The neighbors had seen, the family elders had heard. A decision that dramatic could not be allowed to appear uncertain afterward. In Funmilayo's mind, doubt was weakness, and weakness invited questions. Questions in turn threatened authority. By the following morning, she was already planning the next step. Adekunle sat across from her at the small dining table. His eyes shadowed his posture, rigid. He had barely spoken since the night before. The house felt emptier without Titilayo's quiet presence. though Funmilayo would never admit that the silence unsettled her. "You will not chase after her," Funmilayo said, stirring her tea. "That chapter is closed." Adekunle clenched his jaw. "She is still my wife." Funmilayo's spoon paused mid-air. She looked at him slowly, deliberately. "She was your wife," she corrected. "A wife who failed." The words settled heavily between them. "There is nothing more to discuss," Funmilayo continued. "Moronkeji's family is expecting us this weekend. We will not embarrass ourselves again." Adekunle stared at the table, his thoughts tangled. The image of Titilayo kneeling in the rain refused to leave his mind. Her calm voice, "It's okay," haunted him more than anger ever could have. "I need time," he said quietly. Funmilayo laughed softly. "Time is a luxury for people with options." That afternoon, Funmilayo placed a call. The man who answered spoke with the efficiency of someone used to quiet tasks. "I need information," Funmilayo said. "About a woman named Titilayo Omolara. Everything. Her past, her people." There was a pause. "Any reason for urgency? She is hiding something," Funmilayo replied. "I want to know what." Across the city, Titilayo was trying to rebuild something resembling normalcy. She spent her mornings at the tailoring shop, her afternoons helping Mama Yetunde organize donations, her evenings sitting quietly with other women in the shelter. She spoke more. Now small conversations, careful laughter. But there was still a guardedness about her, as if she were waiting for the ground to shift again. Adekunle did not contact her after their brief encounter by the roadside. Part of her was relieved. Another part mourned what that silence confirmed. One evening, Mama Yetunde found her folding clothes long after the others had gone to rest. "You don't have to prove your usefulness here," Mama Yetunde said gently. Titilayo smiled faintly. "Old habits." Mama Yetunde watched her for a moment. "The people who hurt you, are they still reaching?" Titilayo hesitated. "I think they will." Mama Yetunde nodded. "They always do when they realize you survived." 2 days later, the whispers began. A woman from church passed by the shelter and stopped, her eyes narrowing with recognition. "Is that not Adekunle's wife?" she murmured to someone beside her. By the following day, Titilayo overheard it clearly. She was sent away for stubbornness. They say she refused correction. I heard she wanted to trap the family with pregnancies. The words sliced deeper than she expected. She had endured accusations before, but this felt different. These rumors followed her into the street, into the shop, into the silence of her own thoughts. They painted her not as unfortunate, but as malicious. That night she called Auntie Kikalomo again. "They are talking," Titilayo said simply. "Yes," Kikalomo replied. "That is why I am calling you now." There was a brief pause. "They have started asking questions," Kikalomo continued. "Not the right ones, and not in the right way." Titilayo's grip tightened on the phone. "What does that mean?" "It means Funmilayo is afraid," Kikalomo said calmly, "and fear makes people careless." 2 days later, the investigator reported back. The file lay open on Funmilayo's table as she scanned it impatiently. Elite schools, scholarships that did not list sponsors, a guardian named only as K. Adebola. No record of parents, no traceable hometown beyond a vague mention of Lagos. Funmilayo frowned. "This is incomplete," she snapped. "That's all that's accessible," the man replied. "The rest is sealed." "Sealed by whom?" The investigator hesitated. "By people with influence." Funmilayo leaned back slowly. Influence. The word did not comfort her. It irritated her. "So she is hiding shame," Funmilayo concluded. "A past she doesn't want exposed." The investigator did not argue. Funmilayo dismissed him with a wave and immediately called Moronkeji's mother. "We must move quickly," she said, "before unnecessary stories grow." At the shelter, Titilayo felt the pressure tightening. One afternoon, Mama Yetunde handed her a folded newspaper. There, in a small gossip column, was a vague reference to a young wife dismissed for repeated miscarriages and questionable behavior. No names were printed, but Titilayo knew who it was meant to destroy. Her chest burned with anger. Not loud explosive anger, but a cold, steady fury that left her hands trembling. That night she could not sleep. She pulled the envelope from her bag and placed it on the mattress in front of her. For years it had been a symbol of restraint, a reminder of a life she had chosen not to lean on. She had believed independence meant refusing protection. Now she wondered if independence also meant knowing when to stand alone and when not to. Her phone buzzed again. "Auntie Kikalomo." "They are pushing," Kikalomo said without preamble. "Are you ready to let me step in?" Titilayo closed her eyes. "I don't want revenge," she said. "I just want the lies to stop." Kikalomo's voice softened. "Truth is not revenge. It is release." The words echoed in Titilayo's chest. She thought of the women at the shelter, each carrying stories shaped by silence and blame. She thought of the unborn children she had mourned alone. She thought of the gate slamming shut, the rain, the envelope crushed under a stranger's foot. "I need time," Titilayo said. "You don't have much," Kikalomo replied gently. "Funmilayo is arranging something public." The next morning, Adekunle received an invitation. A formal introduction ceremony. His stomach dropped. When he confronted his mother, Funmilayo did not deny it. "This is how families move forward," she said, with dignity. Adekunle left the house without another word. He walked until his feet ached, until the city blurred around him. He knew with painful clarity that something irreversible was unfolding. Across the city, Titilayo sat, with Mama Yetunde, the envelope between them. Mama Yetunde did not ask what it contained. She only placed her hand over Titilayo's. "Whatever you choose," she said, "choose yourself." Titilayo nodded slowly. That evening, she sent a single message to Auntie Kikalomo. "I'm ready." Somewhere far beyond the shelter and the small tailoring shop and the house she had been expelled from a different machinery, began to move quietly, deliberately. Funmilayo believed she was closing a chapter. She did not yet realize she was walking straight into the consequences of everything she had done. And for Titilayo Omolara, the story was no longer about endurance. It was about truth, finally allowed to breathe. The investigation Funmilayo Adebayo ordered was meant to humiliate. Instead, it unsettled her. She had expected dirt, something crude and obvious that would confirm her belief that Titilayo Omolara was hiding disgrace. What she received instead was absence, gaps, locked doors where answers should have been. Funmilayo sat alone in the sitting room, the investigator's file open before her. She read it again, slowly this time. Elite secondary school in Lagos. University records marked scholarship, private sponsor. No parental information listed. Emergency contact K. Adebola. No scandal, no criminal record. No traceable village lineage she could gossip about. Funmilayo's fingers tightened around the page. People like Titilayo did not come from nowhere. Everyone had roots. Everyone had a story that could be dragged into the light and twisted, unless someone had buried it deliberately. She slammed the file shut. "She thinks she's clever," Funmilayo muttered. The investigator shifted uncomfortably. "Madame, whoever sealed those records has influence." Pushing further, could what Funmilayo snapped. "Expose lies." The man did not answer. Funmilayo dismissed him with a sharp wave of her hand. When the door closed behind him, she sat very still, anger coiling tightly in her chest. Influence meant enemies she could not see, and enemies she could not see made her nervous. That nervousness sharpened her cruelty. If she could not expose Titilayo's past, she would destroy her present. By the end of the week, the rumors intensified. Funmilayo visited relatives, spoke to church elders, placed strategic phone calls. She did not mention sealed records or mysterious sponsors. Instead, she focused on character. She refused correction, she told one woman. She disrespected elders, she told another. She wanted to control my son, she told everyone who would listen. In a culture that prized obedience and fertility, the story spread easily. At the shelter, Titilayo felt the weight of it everywhere. Women at the market whispered when she passed. The shop owner who once greeted her warmly now spoke with forced politeness. A customer canceled an order without explanation. The lies were working. One afternoon, as Titilayo returned from the tailoring shop, a woman she recognized from Adekunle's church stopped her. "You should have tried harder," the woman said bluntly. "Marriage requires patience." Titilayo stood still, the words sinking in. "I tried," she replied quietly. The woman sniffed. Not enough, clearly. That night, Titilayo sat alone on her mattress, her hands clenched tightly together. The envelope lay beside her, unopened, its presence no longer neutral. She realized then that silence was no longer protecting her. It was suffocating her. Her phone rang. Adekunle. She hesitated before answering. "Titi," he said, his voice strained. "My mother has set a date." Titilayo closed her eyes. "For what?" "For the introduction ceremony," he replied, "with Moronkeji." The words landed like a physical blow. "I didn't agree," Adekunle added quickly. "I swear, but she's inviting everyone, family, church, business contacts." Titilayo felt something harden inside her. "So it will be public," she said. "Yes," Adekunle whispered. "I'm scared." She almost laughed, scared of what she asked. "Losing me, or losing your comfort?" He was silent. "That's what I thought," Titilayo said gently. "Don't call me again." She ended the call before he could respond. Across the city, Funmilayo supervised preparations with grim satisfaction. This ceremony would do what investigations could not. It would erase Titilayo from the family narrative entirely. Once Moronkeji was publicly presented, Titilayo would become a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered about women who failed. She did not notice the unease creeping into Moronkeji's eyes. "You seem distracted," Moronkeji said one afternoon as they reviewed guest lists. Funmilayo smiled tightly. "Just details." Moronkeji hesitated. "Adekunle hasn't been himself." "He will adjust," Funmilayo replied briskly. "Men always do." Moronkeji nodded, but doubt flickered briefly across her face. She had agreed to this arrangement believing it was clean. A broken marriage, a woman already gone. The rumors unsettled her, but she ignored them. Ambition had a way of dulling discomfort. At the shelter, Mama Yetunde watched Titilayo carefully. "They are closing in," Mama Yetunde said one evening. "I can feel it." Titilayo nodded. "I know." Mama Yetunde studied her face. "You don't look afraid." "I am," Titilayo admitted. "But I'm more afraid of disappearing." She reached for the envelope and held it in both hands. "For years," she continued, "I believed strength meant refusing help. I wanted to be chosen for who I was not, where I came from." Mama Yetunde listened without interruption. "But now," Titilayo said softly, "I see that refusing protection did not make me strong. It made me exposed." Mama Yetunde placed her hand over Titilayo's. "Wisdom is knowing when to step forward." Later that night, Titilayo called Auntie Kikalomo again. "They're making it public," Titilayo said. "I won't be able to walk away quietly after this." There was a pause on the other end. "Then we won't be quiet," Kikalomo replied calmly. Titilayo swallowed. "I don't want to destroy anyone." "We won't," Kikalomo said. "We will only show the truth." "What if it hurts people?" Titilayo asked. "It will," Kikalomo answered honestly. "Truth always does, but lies hurt longer." Titilayo closed her eyes. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what to do." On the morning of the introduction ceremony, the city buzzed with anticipation. Cars were washed, outfits prepared, phones charged. Funmilayo dressed carefully, her head held high, her movements precise. This was her moment to demonstrate authority restored. Adekunle sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his reflection. He barely recognized the man looking back at him, older, smaller, hollowed by indecision. Across town, Titilayo stood in a borrowed room, the envelope finally opened on the table before her. Inside were documents she had never needed until now. Names, signatures, proof of lineage, proof of protection. Her hands trembled as she read. This was not a weapon. It was a shield she had refused to carry. She folded the papers carefully and placed them back inside the envelope. Then she straightened her shoulders. For the first time since she had been expelled, Titilayo Omolara felt ready not for revenge but for visibility. Funmilayo believed the ceremony would erase a woman. She did not yet understand that it would do the opposite. The night before the introduction ceremony, sleep avoided everyone it mattered to. Funmilayo Adebayo lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing conversations that had not yet happened. In her mind, the event unfolded exactly as she intended. Elders nodding approval, church women smiling knowingly, Murun Keji Balogun standing beside Adekunle, like a promise fulfilled. Titilayo would not be mentioned. Absence would do the work of erasure. Adekunle, on the other hand, slept in fragments. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the rain-soaked street, Titilayo kneeling in mud, her bag slipping from her shoulder. He remembered her voice, steady, not pleading, when she said, "It's okay." The words returned like an accusation. He turned restlessly, the weight of his own inaction pressing on his chest. Across the city, in a quiet room arranged by Auntie Kikalomo Adebola, Titilayo Omolara sat upright on the edge of a neatly made bed, the opened envelope resting on the table beside her. She had read the documents twice already. The language was formal, precise. Legal names, dates, seals. Proof that the life she had stepped away from still existed intact and powerful, waiting behind locked doors she had chosen not to open. Auntie Kikalomo stood by the window, speaking into her phone in a low, efficient tone. "Yes," she said. "Tomorrow. Everything must remain discreet until then." She ended the call and turned to Titilayo. "You don't have to attend," Kikalomo said gently. "We can handle this without you." Titilayo shook her head slowly. "Number 1. I need to be there." Kikalomo studied her. "Why?" "Because," Titilayo replied, "they spoke about me without my presence. They decided my worth publicly. I won't let the truth arrive without me." There was no anger in her voice, only resolve. Kikalomo nodded. "Then we do this your way." She gestured to the chair opposite the bed. "Sit. Let's go through what will happen." They talked late into the night, not about strategy alone, but about boundaries, about what Titilayo wanted revealed and what she wanted kept private, about dignity, not dominance. "I don't want to humiliate Funmilayo," Titilayo said. "I just want her lies to end." "They will," Kikalomo assured her. "But understand this, when truth enters a room built on lies, humiliation happens on its own." The morning arrived quietly. Titilayo dressed simply. A clean, elegant dress in muted tones. No jewelry beyond a small necklace she had owned for years. She looked like herself, not the woman Funmilayo described. Not the heiress she had never claimed, but something steadier in between. As they drove toward the venue, Titilayo watched the city pass by the vendors, setting up stalls, buses honking impatiently, women adjusting headscarves as they walked. Life continued, unaware that a small reckoning was approaching. At the venue, preparations were already underway. Funmilayo supervised everything with sharp efficiency. Chairs arranged in neat rows, refreshments laid out carefully, family elders greeted with deference. She wore her finest attire, her posture proud. Moronkeji stood nearby adjusting her gel, her smile polite, but strained. "You're quiet today," Funmilayo observed. Moronkeji hesitated. "I just want everything to be right." Funmilayo waved a dismissive hand. "It will be. Once this is done, peace will return." Adekunle arrived late. When he entered the compound, his eyes scanned the space unconsciously, as if searching for someone he did not expect to find. His heart pounded with an unease he could not name. Then he saw her. Titilayo stood near the entrance beside a woman he did not recognize, poised, composed, unmistakably present. For a moment, the noise around him faded. She was not supposed to be here. Adekunle froze. Funmilayo noticed his stillness and followed his gaze. Her smile faltered. "What is she doing here?" Funmilayo demanded, her voice tight. Titilayo met her eyes calmly. "I was invited," Titilayo said. Funmilayo scoffed. "By whom?" Before Titilayo could answer, Auntie Kikalomo stepped forward. "By me," she said evenly. The room shifted. Whispers rippled through the guests as attention turned to the newcomer. Her confidence, her bearing the subtle authority in her presence. Some recognized her immediately. Others sensed significance without understanding why. Funmilayo's face drained of color. "Kikalomo Adebola," she said slowly. "What is this?" Kikalomo smiled politely. A correction. Adekunle looked between them, confusion etched into his features. Titilayo took a breath and stepped forward. "I did not come to disrupt," she said, her voice clear enough to carry. "I came to respond to what has been said about me." Funmilayo laughed sharply. "This is not the place," "It is," Titilayo replied. "Because the lies were spoken in places like this." Silence settled over the compound. Kikalomo gestured to a man standing nearby, an attorney, his demeanor composed. He opened a folder. "Madam Funmilayo Adebayo." He began. "Statements have been made regarding Titilayo Omolara's character, fertility, and intentions. We are here to clarify the facts." Funmilayo's eyes darted around, searching for allies. "This is unnecessary," she snapped. "Family matters became public when you made them." So Kikalomo interrupted calmly. The attorney continued. "Medical records show repeated interference with prescribed treatment. Payments were traced to an account linked to a third party acting on instructions." A murmur spread through the crowd. Adekunle's breath caught. He turned toward his mother slowly. "What does he mean?" he asked. Funmilayo's composure cracked. "Lies," she said quickly. "This is manipulation." Titilayo felt the weight of the moment press against her ribs. She stepped forward again. "I lost my children," she said quietly. "Not because I was careless, not because I was cursed, but because I was controlled." She looked at Adekunle, then not accusing, not pleading. "I needed protection," she continued. "I was given silence." Adekunle's eyes filled with tears. Kikalomo nodded to the attorney, who placed another document on the table. Titilayo Omolara, he announced, is the legal daughter of the Adebola family. The name landed like thunder. Gasps filled the air. Funmilayo staggered back a step. "That's impossible," she whispered. Kikalomo's voice remained steady. "It is documented, verified, and protected." She turned to Titilayo. "You never needed to prove your worth. But today, you chose visibility." Titilayo felt her hands tremble, but she held her ground. "I did not marry for wealth," she said. "I married for love. I lived simply because I chose to. That choice does not make me weak." She faced Funmilayo fully now. "You took my pain and turned it into punishment. That ends today." Funmilayo opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Around them, the ceremony lay in ruins, not from shouting or chaos, but from truth settling into every corner, heavy and undeniable. Adekunle stepped forward, his voice breaking. "I failed you." Titilayo met his gaze. Yes, she said softly. You did. The moment hung suspended, unresolved. This was not the end, but it was the point of no return. The silence that followed the revelation did not break easily. It thickened instead, settling over the compound like dust after a collapse, slow, heavy, unavoidable. People shifted in their seats, eyes darting from Titilayo to Funmilayo, from the attorney's documents to Adekunle's stricken face. No one quite knew where to look, because everywhere felt exposed. Funmilayo was the first to move. She straightened her wrapper with trembling hands, lifting her chin, as if posture alone could restore authority. "This is absurd," she said, her voice strained but sharp. "You cannot barge into a family ceremony and rewrite history." Kikolomo's expression did not change. "History does not need rewriting when it has been hidden," she replied. "It only needs light." The attorney cleared his throat. "With respect, madam, the medical findings are conclusive. Records show irregular prescriptions and delayed referrals during critical periods of pregnancy. Payments linked to those decisions were traced." A low murmur rippled through the guests again. Funmilayo's eyes flicked toward Moraunkeji, then to the elders seated at the front. "You will believe strangers over your own," she demanded. "Is this how we treat a mother?" An elderly uncle shifted uncomfortably. "We believe evidence," he said slowly, "and we believe our eyes." Adekunle felt as if the ground beneath him had tilted. He stared at his mother, the woman who had raised him with iron certainty, and for the first time, he saw fear there. Not concern, not grief, fear of exposure. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Funmilayo's lips parted, then pressed together. "I did what I thought was best," she said at last. "A mother must protect her lineage." Adekunle took a step back as if struck. Titilayo watched him, her chest tight. She had imagined this moment many times, anger apologies collapse, but what unfolded was quieter, more devastating. Truth did not scream. It simply stood. "I trusted you," Adekunle said hoarsely. "You let me believe she was the problem." Funmilayo turned on him. "Because she snapped. She brought uncertainty, weakness." Titilayo stepped forward. "I brought pain," she said. "Pain I was already carrying. You added cruelty to it." Her voice did not shake. "I was not allowed to heal," she continued. "I was controlled, monitored, frightened. I was blamed for things no woman should be blamed for." She paused, then added softly, "And you watched." Adekunle closed his eyes. Moraunkeji, who had remained silent until now, stood abruptly. Her face was pale. "You told me she was gone," she said to Funmilayo. "You said there was no conflict." Funmilayo waved her off impatiently. "This does not concern you." "It does," Moraunkeji replied, her voice steadying. "You asked me to step into a lie." She turned to Titilayo. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "I didn't know." Titilayo nodded once. "I believe you." That acknowledgement, small human, seemed to loosen something in the crowd. Whispers turned into conversations. People leaned toward one another, reassessing stories they had accepted too easily. Kikolomo raised her hand gently. "This gathering does not need to continue," she said. "But the truth must be complete." She nodded to the attorney, who opened another file. "There is also the matter of defamation," he said. False statements were circulated regarding Titilayo Omolara's character. These caused loss of livelihood and reputational harm. Funmilayo scoffed, but the sound lacked conviction. Titilayo felt a tightening in her stomach. She had not wanted this part. Exposure was one thing. Consequences were another. "I don't want anyone ruined," she said quickly. Kikolomo turned to her. "Justice does not mean destruction," she said. "It means accountability." Titilayo inhaled slowly. She thought of the shelter of Mama Yatunde's quiet strength, of women who had been crushed by whispers they could not outrun. "Then let it be. Accountability, she said. Nothing more. The attorney nodded. We will proceed accordingly. Adekunle stepped forward, then his voice trembling. I want to speak. Funmilayo spun toward him. You will not shame this family further. Adekunle met her gaze. I already did, he said, by staying silent. He turned to Titilayo. I should have protected you. I chose comfort instead. Titilayo felt the words land, not as relief, not as forgiveness, but as truth acknowledged. An apology does not undo harm, she said gently. But it tells me you see it now. Adekunle swallowed. I do. The elders exchanged glances. One of them rose slowly. This ceremony is concluded, he announced. We will reconvene as a family to address these matters privately. Guests began to disperse, their expressions subdued. The spectacle Funmilayo had planned had collapsed, not in chaos, but in clarity. As people filtered out, Funmilayo remained seated, her rigid posture finally faltering. The power she had wielded for decades had slipped through her fingers, leaving behind something unfamiliar and terrifying: consequences. Kikalomo approached Titilayo quietly. Are you okay? Titilayo nodded, though her legs felt weak. I think so, good Kikalomo said, because this is only the beginning. Later that afternoon, Titilayo returned to the shelter. Mama Yetunde was waiting. She listened without interruption as Titilayo recounted what had happened, the documents, the confrontation. The way truth had shifted the room. When Titilayo finished, Mama Yetunde reached out and pulled her into a brief, firm embrace. You stood, she said. That matters. That night, Titilayo lay awake, exhaustion washing over her in waves. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a quiet ache. She thought of the children she had lost, not as failures now, but as lives that had mattered, however briefly. She allowed herself to mourn them without shame. In the days that followed, the story spread, but differently this time. Not whispers of blame, but measured accounts of exposure. Of a woman who had been wronged and chose truth over vengeance. Of a powerful family forced to reckon with its own cruelty. Funmilayo did not call. Adekunle sent a message she did not answer. Titilayo focused instead on healing. With Kikalomo's support, she arranged medical evaluations with specialists who spoke to her as a person, not a vessel. The findings confirmed what the attorney had suggested. Her losses had been exacerbated by stress and interference, not inherent incapacity. For the first time in years, hope did not feel dangerous. One evening, as she sat with Mama Yetunde in the quiet courtyard, Titilayo spoke softly. I used to think endurance was love, she said. Now I know it isn't. Mama Yetunde smiled. Endurance without dignity is just survival. You chose dignity. Titilayo watched the sky darken, a calm settling over her. The truth had been spoken. Justice had begun, and though healing would take time, she finally believed it was possible. Healing did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly, in appointments kept without fear, in questions answered without accusation, in rooms where Titilayo Omolara was spoken to as a person, not a problem to be solved. After the public reckoning, the world did not suddenly soften, but it did change its posture toward her. The first medical consultation Kikalomo arranged was with Dr. Babatunde Lawal, a specialist whose reputation rested on rigor and restraint. His office was calm, uncluttered, the kind of place where silence felt intentional rather than judgmental. He read Titilayo's history, slowly pausing often to ask questions about timelines, symptoms, the clinics she had visited, the medications she had been given. Did anyone explain why this was prescribed? He asked at one point, tapping a line on the file. Titilayo shook her head. I was told it was necessary. Dr. Lawal nodded, his expression thoughtful rather than alarmed. Necessary is a word people use when they don't want questions. He ordered new tests. He explained each step before taking it. When Titilayo tensed, he noticed and waited. By the end of the consultation, he sat back and folded his hands. "I want to be clear," he said. "Your body is not the enemy." The sentence hit her harder than she expected. For years she had lived as if her body were a liability, unreliable, defective, deserving of control. Hearing otherwise felt like learning a new language. "There are signs," Dr. Lawal continued, "that prolonged stress and improper intervention worsened your losses. Not inevitability, not fate." Titilayo closed her eyes, a slow breath, leaving her chest. Not fate. Kikalomo sat beside her, silent but steady. Outside the clinic, Titilayo leaned against the car for a moment, her legs unsteady. "I didn't know how much I blamed myself," she admitted. Kikalomo nodded. "Blame is easier to carry than anger when anger feels dangerous." In the weeks that followed, the past unfolded in pieces. Kikalomo explained things Titilayo had never needed to know before: why her upbringing had been deliberately quiet, why records were sealed, why certain doors had always opened without explanation when she was younger. It was not a fairy tale of wealth, it was a history shaped by caution. There was a time, Kikalomo said one afternoon, when visibility was a risk. You were protected, so you could choose your life freely. Titilayo absorbed this slowly. "I chose love," she said. "And that choice was real," Kikalomo replied. "What harmed you was not love, it was the refusal of others to respect it." Adekunle reached out again. This time he asked to meet in a public place, a small cafe near the university neutral ground. Titilayo agreed, not out of longing, but out of clarity. He looked thinner when she arrived, older somehow. "I'm not here to ask you back," he said quickly. I needed to say this properly." She nodded, waiting. "I see now what my silence cost you," Adekunle continued. "I was raised to believe obedience was peace. I didn't understand that it can also be violence." Titilayo studied him with a calm that surprised her. "I don't hate you," she said, "but I can't return to a place where I was not protected." He nodded, tears gathering in his eyes. "I understand." They sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of cups filling the space between them. "I'm leaving the house," Adekunle added quietly. "Not because I deserve forgiveness, because I need to learn how to stand without hiding behind anyone." Titilayo felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not sorrow, but closure. "Take care," she said. Back at the shelter, Mama Yetunde watched Titilayo change. She spoke more. She laughed occasionally, softly at first, then with growing ease. She began leading sewing lessons for the younger women, teaching them how to repair and reuse. She listened to their stories without judgment, recognizing familiar patterns of blame and endurance. One evening, a young woman named Halima asked her, "How did you survive?" Titilayo thought carefully before answering. "I stopped believing that suffering was proof of love," she said. "And I stopped carrying shame that wasn't mine." The shelter began to feel less like a refuge and more like a foundation. Kikalomo, ever practical, raised the next question gently. "What do you want to do?" Now Titilayo hesitated. For so long survival had been the goal. Desire felt unfamiliar. "I want to help women like me," she said slowly. Not with speeches, with care. They discussed it over several meetings, how to create something modest, sustainable, respectful. A fund for maternal care, counseling support, partnerships with clinics that prioritized consent and clarity. Titilayo insisted on one condition. "No names on buildings," she said. "No photographs. Let the work speak." The Omolara Maternal Care Initiative began quietly. It started with transport vouchers for prenatal appointments, then counseling sessions at the shelter, then a partnership with Dr. Lawal's clinic for referrals and oversight. Each step was careful, deliberate, grounded. When word spread, it did so without spectacle. Women came hesitantly at first, then with growing trust. Stories surfaced of pressure, of interference, of silence mistaken for virtue. Titilayo listened, present and steady, offering resources, rather than judgment. Funmilayo Adebayo did not appear during any of this. Legal proceedings moved forward methodically. Accountability took the form of formal apologies, community corrections, and monitored consequences, not public shaming. Titilayo did not attend every session. She did not need to. One afternoon, as she reviewed reports at a small desk near the shelter window, a letter arrived. It was from Funmilayo. Titilayo did not open it immediately. She set it aside, her pulse steady. When she finally did, the words inside were not an apology. They were an acknowledgement, stiff, incomplete, but unmistakable. "I believed control was care," the letter read. "I was wrong." Titilayo folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness, she knew, was a process, not a performance. Months passed. Titilayo's health improved. The constant ache receded. Sleep came easier. When she laughed now, it reached her eyes. One evening, as she locked up the small office, Mama Yetunde joined her. "You look lighter," Mama Yetunde observed. "I feel anchored," Titilayo replied. "Like I know where I stand." Mama Yetunde smiled. "That's what dignity does." As they walked back into the courtyard, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in quiet colors. Titilayo paused, placing a hand over her abdomen, not in fear, not in apology, but in acknowledgement of a body that had endured and was still hers. The past had been confronted. The truth had been spoken, and in the space where blame once lived, something steadier had taken root. Not hope born of denial, hope grounded in care, boundaries, and choice. Power once exposed does not disappear quietly. It resists. Funmilayo Adebayo learned this as the weeks passed and the ground beneath her continued to shift. The elders no longer sought her counsel automatically. Church meetings ended without waiting for her opinion. Even the women who once echoed her judgments now spoke with caution, their loyalty thinning under the weight of evidence and consequence. She told herself it was temporary, that people forgot quickly. But power, when built on fear, depended on silence, and silence had broken. At home, the house felt unfamiliar. Adekunle had moved out, taking only what he needed. The rooms echoed. Funmilayo found herself speaking aloud, just to fill the space, issuing instructions that no one followed. One afternoon, she stood in the doorway of the bedroom Titilayo had once shared with her son. The room was bare now, clean, empty. The absence unsettled her, more than confrontation ever had. She did not miss Titilayo. What she missed was control. Across the city, the Omolara Maternal Care Initiative grew slowly, deliberately. Titilayo refused to rush it. Each partnership was vetted, each service documented. Transparency was non-negotiable. When a local clinic requested support, Titilayo visited personally. She asked questions others avoided, about consent, about explanations given to patients, about oversight. Some providers bristled, others welcomed the accountability. "Why are you so careful?" one administrator asked. "Because care without dignity becomes harm," Titilayo replied. Her calm authority surprised people. She did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply insisted. Adekunle watched these changes from a distance. He had taken a small room near his workplace and begun attending counseling sessions arranged through the initiative, not as a favor, but as a condition he set for himself. Each session forced him to confront patterns he had normalized: obedience, mistaken for virtue; silence, mistaken for peace. One evening he wrote Titilayo a message he did not send. "I'm learning to speak." He deleted it, understanding that learning did not entitle him to her attention. Moronkeji Balogun made her own choice. She returned to her mother's home, quietly ending the arrangement, without drama. When asked why, she offered a simple explanation. "I refuse to build a future on someone else's pain." The community took note. Rumors shifted shape. Stories were retold with corrections. The narrative Funmilayo had tried to fix in place, fractured under scrutiny, replaced by a more uncomfortable truth. Cruelty could wear the mask of tradition, and obedience could enable it. Legal accountability moved forward steadily. Funmilayo's role in orchestrating interference was documented. Sanctions were applied. Community reparations were arranged not to shame her, but to repair harm done. She attended one meeting in silence, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Titilayo did not attend. She did not need to. Instead, she sat with a young woman named Zainab at the shelter listening. As Zainab described being blamed for complications she did not cause. Titilayo did not interrupt. She asked what Zainab needed. "Someone to believe me," Zainab said. Titilayo nodded. "I do." The initiative expanded counseling hours. Mama Yatund watched with quiet pride. "You're changing how people think," she told Titilayo one evening. "No," Titilayo replied. "I'm changing what they accept." That distinction mattered. Funmilayo requested a meeting. The message arrived through a mutual elder phrased carefully, stripped of demand. Titilayo considered it for a long time. Kikalomo did not push. "This is your boundary," she said. "Set it where you need." Titilayo agreed to meet, but not privately. They chose a community center, neutral and open. 2 chairs, no audience. Funmilayo arrived first, her posture rigid, her eyes tired. Titilayo entered calmly, taking her seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. "I did not raise my son to be weak," Funmilayo said finally. Titilayo met her gaze. "You raised him to fear displeasing you." Funmilayo's jaw tightened. "Fear keeps families intact. It breaks them," Titilayo replied. Silence returned heavier than before. "I lost my husband," young Funmilayo said abruptly. "I had to become everything: authority, protection, discipline." Titilayo listened. "I believed softness invited chaos," Funmilayo continued. "I believed control was care, and I paid for that belief," Titilayo said gently. Funmilayo's eyes flickered. "You could have left earlier." "Yes," Titilayo agreed. "But leaving doesn't justify harm." The words settled between them. "I won't ask for forgiveness," Funmilayo said at last. "I don't know how." Titilayo considered this carefully. "Then don't," she said. "Choose accountability. Choose change." Funmilayo exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can." "That's your work," Titilayo replied. They stood. The meeting ended without resolution, but not without truth. As Titilayo walked away, she felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty that she had not abandoned herself in the process. Adekunle reached out one final time. He asked if they could speak. Not about reconciliation, but closure. They met briefly. He thanked her for her honesty, for the boundary that forced him to grow. "I'm trying to become someone who doesn't need permission to do what's right," he said. "I hope you do," Titilayo replied. They parted without promises. The initiative marked its first year with a modest report numbers. Outcomes testimonials anonymized. No ceremony, no speeches, just work. One evening, as Titilayo reviewed the data, she paused at a simple line item: prenatal visits attended without interference, 97%. She closed the file and leaned back, a soft smile touching her lips. Change did not always announce itself. Sometimes it appeared as fewer losses, as quieter rooms, as women no longer apologizing for pain. The past still existed, the scars remained, but power had shifted. Not to Titilayo alone, but to truth, to care, to boundaries that refused to bend. And in that shift, something remarkable happened. The cycle that had punished her broke. The day the truth reached its widest audience did not come with sirens or spectacle. It came disguised as routine. The Community Health Forum had been scheduled weeks earlier, a modest gathering organized by the Omolara Maternal Care Initiative in partnership with local clinics and women's groups. The agenda listed panel discussions, testimonies, and a closed session on ethical standards in maternal care. Nothing about it suggested confrontation. Funmilayo Adebayo attended, because attendance had become expected of her. After the sanctions, after the meetings, after the uncomfortable recalibration of her status absence, would have been read as defiance. She arrived dressed carefully, her expression neutral, her movements measured. People noticed, they always did, but they no longer parted instinctively to make space. Titilayo Omolara arrived later quietly. She greeted Mama Yatunde, checked in with volunteers, and reviewed the final program. There was no nervousness in her movements, now only focus. She did not scan the room for Funmilayo. She did not need to. When the forum began, the room settled into attentive calm. Dr. Babatunde Lawal spoke first, presenting anonymized data patterns of loss correlated with stress interference and lack of informed consent. He spoke plainly without accusation, allowing the numbers to do the work. A counselor followed, describing the psychological toll of blame placed on women after pregnancy loss. Heads nodded, some faces tightened. Then came the testimonies. Women spoke, not to accuse but to describe. One talked about being denied rest, another about medications changed without explanation, another about being told her grief was proof of failure. Each voice added weight. Funmilayo listened, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She told herself this was not about her, that it was general, educational. Then the facilitator announced the final session. Accountability and repair, she said. What it looks like in practice. Titilayo stood. The room grew very still. She did not begin with her story. She began with a principle. Care, she said evenly, becomes harm when it ignores consent. Tradition becomes cruelty when it silences pain. Authority becomes abuse when it refuses correction. She paused, letting the words settle. I stand here not as a victim, she continued, but as someone who chose to stop disappearing. There was no drama in her tone, no appeal for sympathy. I was blamed publicly for losses I did not cause, she said. My body was controlled, my grief was weaponized, and my silence was mistaken for agreement. A murmur moved through the room. I am not here to demand punishment, Titilayo said. I am here to show what accountability requires. She nodded to the facilitator. A document appeared on the screen behind her. Not names, not faces, but timelines and decisions. Points where consent was bypassed, where interference occurred, where authority overstepped. Repair, Titilayo said, means acknowledging harm without excuses. It means restoring access, dignity, and voice. She looked out over the audience, over women who recognized themselves in the words, over professionals, confronted by uncomfortable clarity. Then she turned. Her gaze landed on Funmilayo. For a long moment, neither moved. Some harm, Titilayo said gently, is done by people who believe they are protecting something. A lineage, a reputation, control. Funmilayo's jaw tightened. But protection that costs another person their humanity is not protection, Titilayo continued. It is fear. The room held its breath. Titilayo did not accuse Funmilayo by name. She did not need to. Funmilayo stood. The movement surprised everyone, including herself. She felt the eyes on her, the expectation. The judgment she had once wielded so freely now turned inward. Her heart pounded. The old instinct to dominate, to dismiss, rose and fell, uselessly. I taught myself, Funmilayo said, her voice rough, that control was survival. The words sounded strange aloud. I believed softness invited loss, she continued. I believed obedience kept families whole. She swallowed. I was wrong. The admission rippled through the room. Funmilayo straightened, forcing herself to continue. I interfered where I had no right, she said. I spoke where I should have listened. I used authority to avoid fear. Her eyes flicked briefly to Titilayo, then away. I cannot undo what I did, Funmilayo said, but I can stop defending it. Silence followed. Not stunned, but thoughtful, the facilitator stepped forward. "Thank you," she said quietly. "This is what accountability sounds like." Funmilayo sat. Her shoulders sagged as if a great weight had finally been set down. The forum concluded without applause. People stood slowly processing what they had witnessed. Conversations sparked not gossip, but reckoning. Clinic administrators approached Titilayo to ask questions. Women thanked her without dramatics. Some simply nodded, eyes bright. Adekunle watched from the back of the room. He had come unannounced, uncertain whether he belonged there. Listening to his mother speak, stripped away the last illusion he had been clinging to, that silence had been neutral. When he caught Titilayo's eye afterward, she acknowledged him with a brief nod. Nothing more was required. Outside, the afternoon sun softened the edges of the day. Titilayo stood with Kikalomo and Mama Yetunde near the steps, answering questions, directing volunteers. "You did not corner her," Mama Yetunde observed quietly. "I didn't need to," Titilayo replied. "The truth had space." Kikalomo smiled faintly. "You chose the hardest form of justice." That evening, messages arrived from clinics requesting training, from women seeking counseling, from community leaders asking for guidance. The work expanded not through force, but through credibility earned. Funmilayo left alone. She walked without her usual entourage. Her steps measured, her thoughts loud. For the first time in years, she did not plan her next move. She simply absorbed the consequence of having been seen. At home, she sat in the quiet and did not fill it with commands. Titilayo returned to the shelter, late exhausted. She sat on the bench in the courtyard, letting the cool air settle her nerves. The magnitude of the day pressed in. Not triumph, not victory, but release. Mama Yetunde joined her. "You held your ground," Mama Yetunde said, "and you did not harden." Titilayo exhaled slowly. "I was afraid I would." "You didn't," Mama Yetunde replied. "That's how healing lasts." As night fell, Titilayo looked up at the darkening sky. The lies had been confronted publicly. The authority that once crushed her had named its failure. The room that had erased her had finally made space. This was the climax, not of revenge, but of reckoning. Not the end of pain, but the end of denial. And in that ending, something rare had occurred. Justice had been spoken without cruelty. Truth had stood without shouting, and Titilayo Omolara had remained herself all the way through. After the forum, life did not slow down. It recalibrated. For Titilayo Omolara, the days that followed were filled with work that felt heavier than before, not because of resistance, but because responsibility had expanded. Calls came in steadily. Clinics requested guidance. Community leaders asked for frameworks, not speeches. Women arrived at the shelter with quieter voices and clearer eyes, no longer apologizing before they spoke. The truth had not created comfort. It had created obligation. Titilayo welcomed it. The Omolara Maternal Care Initiative moved into its next phase with deliberate care. Protocols were formalized. Consent guidelines were drafted and shared. Training sessions were scheduled, not only for medical staff, but for families, elders, and faith leaders who often shape decisions behind closed doors. Titilayo insisted on one rule, above all others. No woman speaks alone in a room where her body is being discussed. The rule unsettled some. It challenged habits passed down unquestioned, but it held. Dr. Lawal oversaw clinical partnerships with increasing confidence. Counselors were trained to identify coercion masked as concern. The shelter became not just a refuge, but a referral hub, quietly effective, stubbornly humane. Mama Yetunde watched it all with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're carrying a lot," she said one evening, handing Titilayo a bowl of soup. "I know," Titilayo replied. "But I'm not carrying it alone anymore." That distinction mattered. Adekunle kept his distance as Titilayo had asked. When they did cross paths at community meetings, at shared consultations, there was no bitterness, only a sober recognition of what had been lost and what could not be reclaimed. Adekunle continued counseling, learning to speak without seeking permission, learning that accountability was not a performance. One afternoon, he sent a final message. "Thank you for choosing truth, even when I didn't." Titilayo read it, acknowledged it silently, and did not reply. Some closures did not need words. Funmilayo Adebayo's transformation was slower, less visible. She attended the required accountability sessions. She complied with community reparations. She withdrew from public leadership roles without protest. Neighbors noticed she spoke less, that she listened more. One morning she appeared at the shelter, not announced, not invited. Mama Yatunde met her at the gate. "I'm here to volunteer," Funmilayo said stiffly. Mama Yatunde studied her carefully. "We don't offer redemption roles." Funmilayo nodded. "I know. I'm here to work." She was assigned to sorting supplies. No audience, no authority. Titilayo was informed later that day. She did not intervene. Boundaries she had learned did not require supervision. Months passed. The initiative's impact became measurable. Fewer interrupted treatments, increased reporting of coercion, women returning to clinics with advocates beside them. Small shifts multiplied. One evening after a long day, Titilayo sat alone in the small office reviewing reports. She paused at a familiar feeling, a gentle ache different from before. Not sharp, not alarming. She noticed it without fear. When she mentioned it to Dr. Lawal at her next appointment, he listened carefully, then smiled. "Let's observe," he said, calmly. For the first time in years, waiting did not terrify her. Weeks later, the confirmation came quietly, without drama. This time there was no rush to announce, no audience, no rituals, just information handled with care. Titilayo sat on the edge of the clinic bed, absorbing it slowly. Her hands rested on her lap, steady. "How do you feel?" Dr. Lawal asked. "Present," she replied. She told Mama Yatunde first, then Kikalomo. No one celebrated loudly. They adjusted schedules, strengthened support, made space. The pregnancy unfolded differently, not because of luck, but because of protection, rooted in consent, rest, and dignity. Titilayo continued working, but with boundaries firmly in place. She delegated, she rested, she allowed care. At the shelter, the women noticed the shift in her energy. "You're glowing," someone said once. Titilayo smiled gently. "I'm supported." That became her quiet refrain. When the time came, the birth did not happen under pressure or spectacle. It happened in a room filled with calm. Titilayo held her child's small, warm reel and felt the past loosen its grip. Not erased, integrated. She did not name the child after victory. She named the child after continuity. A reminder that healing did not erase history. It carried it forward differently. Months later, at a modest gathering marking another year of the initiative, Titilayo stood briefly to speak. She did not tell her whole story. She did not need to. "Pain becomes power when it is listened to," she said simply, "and power becomes justice when it protects the vulnerable." She looked out over the room, over women who no longer bowed their heads automatically, over professionals who now asked, before deciding, over elders who had learned that tradition could evolve without collapsing. "This work is not about me," Titilayo continued. "It's about what we refuse to accept anymore." When she finished, there was no applause, only nods. That was enough. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, Titilayo walked slowly through the courtyard with Mama Yatunde. "You broke a cycle," Mama Yatunde said. "No," Titilayo replied. "I stepped out of it." Others followed. She paused, placing a hand over her child's back, feeling the steady rhythm of life. Once she had been thrown out for miscarriages she did not cause. Once she had been silenced by people who mistook cruelty for tradition. Now she stood rooted not because of wealth, not because of power, but because she had chosen truth, boundaries, and dignity when endurance was no longer enough. And in doing so, Titilayo Omolara had turned injustice into care, not just for herself, but for every woman who came after. The story of Titilayo Omolara is not about wealth revealed or power reclaimed. It is about something quieter and far more difficult: the courage to stop accepting pain as destiny. Too often society teaches women to endure in silence, to believe that suffering is proof of love, that obedience is virtue, that loss must always be explained as failure. Titilayo was taught the same lessons, and they nearly erased her. Not because she was weak, but because the world around her confused control with care, tradition with truth, and authority with righteousness. Her healing did not begin when her status was revealed. It began when she chose dignity over endurance, when she understood that love without protection is not love, that silence does not preserve peace, it only protects harm, and that boundaries are not acts of rebellion but acts of self-respect. What makes this story powerful is not justice served as punishment, but justice expressed as repair. Titilayo did not seek to destroy those who wronged her. She sought to stop the cycle that allowed cruelty to hide behind respectability. She showed that accountability can exist without vengeance, and that truth, when spoken calmly and consistently, has a strength no fear can withstand. This story is for anyone who has been blamed for pain they did not cause, for anyone told to wait, endure, or disappear to keep others comfortable. It reminds us that healing is not forgetting the past, it is refusing to let the past define what we deserve next. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect. Where in your life have you been silent when you needed protection? And where can dignity begin to replace endurance? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. If you believe in stories about justice, healing, and the quiet power of truth, subscribe to this channel and stay with us. More stories like this are coming, and they are written for you.